The wind whistled through the tall castle gates as dawn crept over the horizon. A young princess stood at her window, clutching the silk curtains tightly in her hands. Her heart was heavy, not because she was afraid, but because she knew her life was about to change forever. She had been promised in marriage to a prince in a distant kingdom, and today was the day she must leave her childhood home. Her name was Alara. She was gentle, thoughtful, and loved by the people of her land. While many nobles lived with pride and vanity, Alara spent her days walking among the gardens, feeding the birds, and speaking kindly to servants and villagers alike. But though she was a princess, her heart carried no sense of superiority. She longed only to live with kindness and to be understood for who she truly was. Her mother, the queen, worried deeply. She knew her daughter's journey would be long and dangerous, filled with unfamiliar lands and uncertain people. So before Alara departed, the queen called her into her chamber. "My child," she said softly, holding out a silk handkerchief embroidered with golden thread. "Keep this with you always. As long as it is near, you will never be alone. Remember my love, wherever you go." Alara tucked the handkerchief carefully into the folds of her dress, pressing it close to her heart. When the time came to leave, a carriage stood waiting at the castle gates, loaded with treasures meant for the prince's family. At Alara's side was her maid, a girl named Brina, who had been chosen to accompany her on the journey. The two set off together, the horses pulling them farther and farther away from the familiar safety of home. For many days they traveled through forests, valleys, and across rushing rivers. At first Brina was dutiful and polite. But as the days stretched on, jealousy began to simmer in her heart. She saw the jewels and fine gowns Alara carried. She saw how gently the princess spoke, and how people along the road admired her grace. And slowly, a dark thought grew in Brina's mind. On the 7th day of travel, the sun blazed hot in the sky. Their carriage had broken down, and the girls were forced to continue on horseback. At midday, Alara dismounted to drink from a clear spring along the roadside. She bent to fill her cup, and when she turned, Brina stood above her with a cold expression. "Why should you have everything, princess, while I serve at your side like a shadow?" Brina hissed. "You wear silks, you carry treasures, and you are promised to a prince. Yet I am no less clever, no less strong. Today, that will change." Alara stared, stunned. "Brina, you are my companion, my friend. What are you saying?" Brina drew herself tall. "I will take your place. You will hand me your gowns, your jewels, and your identity. From this moment on, I am the princess, and you," she tossed a ragged cloak toward Alara. "You will be nothing more than my maid." Alara's heart raced. She thought of running, of fighting, but the roads were empty, and Brina's eyes burned with fury. When Alara hesitated, Brina leaned closer and whispered with threat, "If you speak a single word of truth to anyone, I will make sure you never see your kingdom again." Trembling, Alara gave over her gowns and jewels. Brina mounted her horse proudly, now dressed as royalty, while Alara followed in silence, cloaked in rags. At last, they reached the gates of the distant kingdom. Trumpets sounded, banners waved, and the young prince himself came forth to greet his bride. Brina stepped down from her horse with an elegant bow, her eyes glittering with triumph. The prince, tall and noble, reached for her hand. "Welcome, my princess," he said warmly. Then his gaze drifted past her, landing on Alara, who stood quietly behind, holding the reins of the horses. Though clothed in rags, her posture was graceful, and there was a gentleness in her eyes that tugged at his heart. "And who is this?" the prince asked. Brina forced a smile. "Oh, just my maid. She will tend to the geese in your meadows. It is all she is fit for." The prince said nothing, but something in his chest stirred uneasily. From that day on, Alara was sent to work among the castle's goosekeepers. Every morning she rose before dawn, leading the birds out to the meadow. She washed in the stream, braided her long golden hair, and sang softly to herself as the geese waddled beside her. The castle folk laughed at her, calling her the Goose Girl, but Alara bore their words with quiet dignity. Yet fate has a way of turning, even in the darkest times. One morning, as Alara led the geese across the meadow, the young prince happened to ride by on horseback. He paused, watching her from a distance. She knelt to rescue a gosling tangled in thorny briars, pricking her hands but smiling softly as she freed the little creature. He saw the way the geese clustered around her, as though they trusted her completely. He saw the warmth in her face when she thought no one was looking. Day after day, he returned secretly, drawn by something he could not explain. And with each passing moment, the unease in his heart grew stronger. The woman he had been promised, the so-called princess, was proud, sharp, and unkind. But this Goose Girl, she carried herself with a quiet nobility that seemed truer than any crown. Still, Alara said nothing of her past. She had sworn silence, and though her heart ached, she honored her word. Then came the harvest festival, when the kingdom gathered to celebrate under lanterns and music. The prince wandered through the crowd, searching for something he could not name. At the edge of the meadow, he found Alara sitting alone beneath an oak tree, her geese nestled close around her. "You sing with such sorrow," he said gently, approaching. "Why does a girl as kind as you carry such sadness in her eyes?" Alara looked down. For a long moment, she said nothing. But the pain within her heart swelled until at last she whispered, "If only walls could speak, they would tell you the truth." The prince tilted his head. "Then let them speak," he replied softly. And he called for the guards to build a small iron stove, its hollow frame shaped like a chamber. When it was ready, he led Alara to it. "Speak your truth here, where only silence will listen." And so Alara, kneeling before the stove, poured out her heart. She told of her mother's farewell gift, of Brina's betrayal, of the stolen identity, and of her vow of silence. Tears slid down her cheeks as the words escaped at last, and when she finished, her shoulders trembled with both fear and relief. What Alara did not know was that the prince had ordered the stove's door left ajar. Hidden nearby, he had listened to every word. His heart burned with both fury and admiration, for the cruelty Alara had endured, and for the courage with which she had endured it. The very next morning, the prince summoned the court. Before nobles and servants alike, he demanded the truth of Brina. At first she laughed and denied, but under the prince's piercing gaze, her lies crumbled. She confessed in shame, and the court gasped with horror. Alara, clothed still in rags, was brought forth. The prince stepped down from his throne, took her trembling hand, and looked into her tear-filled eyes. "You are the true princess," he said with reverence. "No crown, no gown, no jewels could hide the nobility of your heart. It shines brighter than any treasure." At that, the hall erupted with cries of joy. Servants and nobles alike fell to their knees, recognizing the rightful bride. Brina was led away, her pride shattered, while Alara stood in wonder, hardly believing her suffering had at last come to an end. The prince smiled, lifting her hand to his lips. "No longer the Goose Girl," he whispered, "but my queen-to-be." And as the castle bells rang out, the geese in the meadow lifted their wings to the sky, as if to carry the story on the wind for all to hear.